Last weekend, we celebrated Pride Shabbat in an explosion of color and beauty and joy as we affirmed our values-based commitment to inclusivity, to representation, and to love. We assembled a gorgeous rainbow chuppah right here on our bima, a wedding canopy that symbolizes our promise to our community that our Judaism affirms and sanctifies love between partners regardless of gender identity and sexual orientation. And together we prayed that one day love will win, and that the Torah's directive to ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself, will be as natural as breathing. The next morning, we gathered together downtown to participate in the Heartland Pride Parade. We came together as a Jewish community with partners from Bethel Synagogue and the Jewish Community Relations Council and others. We marched with our rainbow-colored chuppah, reminding our friends and neighbors that while religion can be weaponized against LGBTQ folks, that our Jewish community will not stand for it, and that we strive to be open, affirming, and welcoming to all people. All week long, I've been thinking about pride and the gratitude that I feel that Pride Shabbat has become a core piece of who we are as a community. That from the first time we decided to participate in Pride in 2018 by creating spaces both here at Temple and in our wider community, it has never been a question about whether to continue that, but rather it's become a cherished tradition within our Temple family. The liberal Jewish community's commitment to LGBTQ+ inclusivity has become synonymous with participation in Pride all throughout the country, and yet it has not come without challenges. In many spaces, liberal Jews have found it difficult to navigate our presence, not because we ourselves are conflicted by holding both truths, but because anti-Semitism creeps in. Sometimes Jewish people are passively or actively unwelcome in these spaces, in the advocacy and the coalitions, because of our Judaism and a presumed relationship with Israel, without pausing to understand the nuance or the complexities of what that relationship may or may not be for each individual Jewish person. This challenge isn't new, and it's only been exacerbated by the growing anti-Semitism that we've faced in recent months. But tonight I'm not going to talk about or debate the whys or the hows or the whats of that anti-Semitism. Instead, I want to talk about us. I want to talk about what we do with the challenges that we may face when we want to be a part of communities whose values we largely share, and how to respond to them. A couple of years ago, I taught a class to our teens on feminism and Judaism. One of the things we talked about was intersecting identities and how we hold space for multiple pieces of ourselves, and what to do when external forces tell us that we can't or shouldn't hold both. We talked about generalities. We also talked about specifics, like the 2017 Chicago Dyke March, whose organizers prohibited participants from marching with a rainbow pride flag that had a Jewish star in the middle, citing that Jewish star's association with Israel, instead of recognizing it as a historic, symbolic, significant notion that were all Jews predating the modern state of Israel by hundreds of years. So what do we do in those instances? How do we continue to be present and positive representatives of spaces that ask us to choose one value or one identity over another? Do we cede those spaces who don't want to recognize both? Or do we stay in them, working through and navigating the discomfort and the challenges? Now, it's important to note that I'm talking about how we make our decisions when we find ourselves in uncomfortable or unwelcome spaces, not when we have real reasons to fear for our safety, and it's important to know when the differences come. But it's sometimes difficult to know what the right decision is, because who wants to be part of a space that doesn't welcome them in the fullness of their identities, including their Judaism? And yet, who wants to lose a piece of themselves by ceding the space to others who claim that Jews don't belong? I want to suggest that this week's Torah portion can lend itself to helping us understand how to navigate these kinds of challenging spaces. In Parshat Balak, we deal with questions of how we interact with our neighbors. Here we meet a king named Balak who asks a local prophet for hire, Bilam, to curse the Israelites, who are trespassers on his land. The king has seen what the Israelites had done to the Ammonites, and he was frightened for his people. And so when the Israelites started marching towards his land, he decided that he needed Balaam to curse the Israelites. And so God tells Balaam to go with the messengers to Balak. He encounters lots of challenges along the way. There's a talking donkey involved, but that's a story for another time. But ultimately, Balaam arrives and greets Balak, the king. The king takes him to several different vantage points where he can see the Israelites to find the best place for cursing them, because location matters in this instance. But when Balaam sees the Israelites, he says, "From their beginning I see them as mountain peaks, and I behold them as hills. It is a nation that will dwell alone." It's a nation that will dwell alone. Now that's a scary thing to behold, to be a nation that is destined to dwell alone. But sadly, there is some truth to this prophecy. Historically, the Jews have been a people who have often dwelled alone. We've lived isolated, apart, forced to wander from country to country, never citizens, just mere passers-by on the road to an unknown future. From the Crusades to pogroms to the Holocaust to hate crimes, we have often felt alone. And yet our story isn't so straightforward. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke here from this bima about what it means that we have been part of America since the 1600s, predating the establishment of our country. We are not a nation that dwells alone here. We're a part of the great American experiment. And at times we feel alone, even while we are part of it. But we're not alone. To describe ourselves as alone would, I think, diminish our story. And at the times we feel most alone, those, I believe, are the times that we need to make an even firmer commitment to growing our partnerships and our connections within and amongst our communities. These are the times that we need to be more present, more vocal, more committed to building relationships with others whose values align with ours, even and maybe especially when it's challenging. Because we don't have to agree on everything, to agree on something. When we find ourselves in challenging situations, when intersecting identities or values are clashing, and external forces say that we have to choose, we don't have to cede that space. We don't have to buy into a narrowing of values. We can lead into the expansiveness of those values and the interpretations and the questions that Judaism not only allows, but invites us to do and encourages us to engage with. We can choose to be present in spite of our discomfort, and we can help our communities and our neighbors and our partners see that Judaism is a both-and religion, not an either-or. We can choose to stand for something together rather than each of us standing apart and alone, because when we stand together, we have a chance to grow together. Shabbat last week, I think, was a beautiful example of that, of a time where we chose to be fully engaged and aligned with the values that we believe in as a community, and to stand publicly and proudly as Jews who are open, affirming, and inclusive of all people, regardless of their gender or sexual orientation. To me, this is the aspirational challenge of the blessing that's in this Torah portion, that we say each and every morning, uttered from the would-be prophet for hire Balaam himself. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. How good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Rashi teaches that what the prophet for hire Balaam saw was that the Israelites were modeling how to live respectfully with their neighbors, next to them, with them. And to be clear, this is a work in progress for the Jewish community. We are oftentimes still figuring out how to see each other as one community, even when we disagree amongst ourselves on core pieces of our faith. But I believe that there's yet another challenge embedded here, pushing us to find ways to live in harmony, in partnership, in community with all of our neighbors. Sometimes we'll align, and sometimes we won't. But being part of being Jewish is working towards a better world and a better future for all people, and we cannot and we will not achieve that by holding on to the narrative that we are or should be a nation who dwells alone. This Shabbat, I pray that we can continue to aspire towards being a community that shows up for each other, to celebrate, to bear witness, to affirm each other in the fullness of our values and our identities, even when we disagree, to be a community that loudly and proudly and courageously works towards a better world together. Shabbat Shalom.